He walked onto America's Got Talent as a school janitor from Indiana and walked out with a win nobody saw coming. But the confetti, the applause, and the viral moment hid something far more heartbreaking and shocking than the performance that made him famous. When the season ended, Richard made a choice that stopped fans in their tracks and raised real questions about what was happening behind the scenes. His rise was emotional, his journey unforgettable, and the truth he finally confirmed is nothing anyone predicted. Where is Richard today, and what is he doing now? The answer will genuinely surprise you. How the world found Richard. The world met Richard Goodall in a way even he never expected through a simple moment captured inside a middle school where he'd spent most of his adult life working. In 2022, while finishing up another day at West VO Middle School in Terrett, Richard began singing just like he'd always done when students gathered. At that moment, someone pulled out a phone, recorded him performing Don't Stop Believing, and posted it online without any idea of what would happen next. By the time he returned to work the following morning, his voice had already begun to spread. First through TikTok, then through every social media platform that thrives on unexpected moments. People immediately began sharing the video, and as the views climbed, the national media took notice. News outlets replayed the clip. Comment sections filled with applause. It wasn't long before talent scouts and television producers started paying attention, too. But in the middle of all the noise, Richard was still waking up early, putting on his work shirt, and showing up at the same job he'd held for more than 20 years. What people didn't realize was how unfamiliar this kind of attention was for Richard. His life had been simple, steady, and rooted in Indiana from the very beginning. He was born in Indianapolis and spent almost all of his life in Terrett, building routines and finding fulfillment in the things most people overlook. At West VGO Middle School, he wasn't just a janitor. He was the guy who greeted kids with a smile, who made them laugh when they were having a rough day, and who hummed and sang along to classic rock songs while cleaning the cafeteria. Students saw him every day, and over time, he became woven into the culture of the school. So when America's Got Talent reached out, the opportunity was almost overwhelming. Richard had never been on a plane before. He had never traveled across the country, never stepped into an environment filled with cameras, bright lights, and millions of viewers. In May 2024, he boarded a flight to Los Angeles for the first time in his life, carrying nothing but his voice, his nerves, and the support of a community that had been cheering him on since that first viral video. For most contestants, the America's Got Talent stage is part of a long journey they've been preparing for. But for Richard, it was a leap into a world he had only ever watched from distance. When he walked onto that stage, the nervousness showed softly at first, then more clearly as he introduced himself. But the moment the music started, something familiar returned. His voice settled, his expression changed, and suddenly the shy janitor from Indiana filled the entire auditorium with a performance that felt both intimate and powerful. As he sang Don't Stop Believing, the judges leaned in. The audience rose to their feet, and Heidi Klum made the decision that would change everything for him. She reached for the golden buzzer, and as the confetti fell, Richard stood there stunned, emotional, and overwhelmed by a moment far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. From that point on, he treated the competition like the opportunity of a lifetime. Every performance became a way to honor the people who had supported him long before the cameras appeared. In the quarterfinals, he chose How Am I Supposed to Live Without You and dedicated it to his fiancée Angie, singing with a conviction that made the song feel personal, even to people who didn't know him. When he returned for the semifinals with Eye of the Tiger, he showed a completely different side of himself, a stronger, more energetic performance that proved he wasn't just a viral story. He was a contender with range and presence. By the time he reached the finals, he knew deep inside that he was representing the people who helped him get there. In the finale, Richard circled back to the band that had unknowingly shaped this chapter of his life. He performed faithfully, pouring every emotion and every experience he had into the song. And shortly after, Richard Goodall was crowned the season 19 winner of America's Got Talent. The confetti, the lights, and the applause marked this emotional moment that felt even bigger than the show itself. This wasn't just a victory. It was a confirmation of every unseen effort and every moment when he kept singing, even though no one in the industry was listening. But behind all of that success was something heartbreaking that explained why his performances carried so much heart. The world saw the win. However, what they didn't see were the wounds behind the voice. And that part of his story reveals even more about the man America fell in love with. The wounds behind the voice. Richard Goodall's rise may have looked sudden from the outside, but the truth is that he had been carrying years of disappointment long before America ever heard him sing a single note. He had tried before when he auditioned for The Voice, hoping for a break or at least a chance to be seen. But nothing came of it. No call back and no encouragement, just silence, the kind every artist knows too well. After that disappointment, he went back to his life the way most people do after a rejection, quietly, without complaint, and determined to keep going. Music didn't leave his life, but the dream of making it big felt like something he placed back on a shelf, hoping it might still matter someday. For a while, he found comfort in a small gospel band that gave him a reason to keep singing. They traveled, played together, and built something that felt steady. But when the pandemic hit, everything stopped overnight. Venues shut down, gatherings ended, and the band he had leaned on fell apart completely. It wasn't anybody's fault, but it left Richard with another empty space to navigate. Losing that band meant losing one of the few places where his voice felt understood, and he had to rebuild his confidence from scratch all over again. But nothing could have prepared Richard for the hardest chapter of them all. In 2021, Richard lost his first wife, Patricia Sue, to kidney cancer. She had been his partner through so many years, the person who encouraged him even when he doubted himself. Losing her changed everything. It went beyond just grief. It was the sudden feeling of being unanchored. The routines they built together were gone. The house felt different. The days felt longer. He showed up at work because that's who he was. But inside, he was learning how to navigate a life he didn't recognize anymore. That kind of loss doesn't disappear. You carry it. And when he eventually returned to singing, you could hear that weight in his voice. After America's Got Talent, when life finally reached a high point, he was hit with yet another unexpected twist. The whirlwind of interviews, travel, rehearsals, and new responsibilities pushed him so hard that his body eventually forced him to slow down. He underwent hernia surgery in 2024, a procedure he needed but kept private for a while. Recovering from that surgery meant pulling back from everything he had been running toward. It gave him time to think, to breathe, and to understand how drastically his life had changed in such a short period. But life didn't stay heavy. Somewhere between rebuilding and grieving, Richard found love again. Her name was Angie, and she entered his life in 2022, long before America's Got Talent transformed him into a public figure. She didn't see him as a viral sensation or a celebrity. She saw the man behind all of it, the one who worried, who hoped, who carried so much of his story quietly. Over time, she became the person he leaned on, the one who steadied him through the ups and downs of the competition, and the one who reminded him that he deserved more than just occasional moments of happiness. And when America's Got Talent's pressure was at its highest, she was the voice telling him to keep going. In fact, just days before the show's finale, they tied the knot, not for attention, but because she was someone who made life feel full again for him. But that's not all Angie did. She also pushed him to look for answers in his own past, a place he had never dared to explore. Richard grew up without knowing his biological father. For years, that space stayed empty, and he made peace with it. But Angie believed he deserved closure and a chance to understand where he came from. With her encouragement, he searched, and what he found surprised him. His father was alive, a retired K-9 officer and Army veteran, living a life completely separate from Richard's. Along with him came 3 siblings Richard had never met before. When they finally connected, the moment felt bigger than all of them. He shared the news on his social media account saying, "Thanks to Ancestry and Angie, I found my biological father. He is a retired K-9 police officer in Indy, not to mention a retired Army veteran." He has no children, so you can imagine his shock to find out after all these years he has a son. While I can't tell you the whole story, he wasn't even told I existed. And he used to play drums, guitar, and mandolin. A huge thank you to my Angie. Had it not been for her, I wouldn't have tried to look. This new relationship didn't erase the past, but it definitely added a sense of belonging. He didn't know he had been missing to his future. Through everything he experienced, the people in his community stayed supportive. Even when America's Got Talent required him to fly to Los Angeles, it wasn't a corporation or a sponsorship that covered his travel. It was regular people, friends, neighbors, and strangers who had watched his TikTok clip and recognized a piece of themselves in him. They pulled their money, set up fundraisers, and made sure he had everything he needed to simply step onto that stage. But even with everything he'd been through, nothing prepared people for what he decided next. It was a choice that caught everyone off guard. A decision that changed the direction of his story in a way no one saw coming. The choice that shocked everyone. Nobody expected Richard's next move. Not the audience who voted for him. Not the reporters waiting outside the studio. Not even some of the fans who had followed every step of his journey. After winning America's Got Talent, most people assumed he would trade in his janitor badge for a full-time music career. They pictured him signing contracts, moving to bigger cities, and leaving behind the life he had known for decades. But the moment the cameras stopped rolling, Richard made a decision that said far more about who he really is than any performance ever could. He chose to go back to work as a janitor at West VGO Middle School, the same building he had left before the finale. When interviewers asked why, he didn't make a dramatic statement or try to turn it into a grand lesson. He kept it simple. He explained that he planned to continue working at the school while new opportunities pop up and that he never expected to win in the first place. In fact, the whole experience still felt unreal to him. During the competition, he often said, America's Got Talent was anyone's game, and he meant it. He didn't walk in thinking he was destined to take the title. He walked in hoping people would understand how much singing meant to him. That was it. Fame wasn't the dream. Expression was. He wanted to share what he loved with people who might connect to it. And the show became the doorway that allowed that to happen. Believe it or not, Richard actually liked where he worked.